Well, this week on his swing through the Middle East, President Donald Trump gave, I think, a groundbreaking speech in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, in front of Mohammed bin Salman, Elon Musk, and many other luminaries that is an absolutely pivotal, it marks an absolutely pivotal moment in geopolitics and in American history, frankly. And as much as the media is obsessing over the Qatari jet that is being donated to Donald Trump. It's in the works, at least. You've probably heard about this story. It, on its face, looks absolutely corrupt, seems to be completely objectionable in many different ways. Set that aside for the moment. It's sort of the shiny object in the news cycle this week, and there just has not been sufficient digestion of what Donald Trump did in Saudi Arabia, what he continues to do as he heads to Qatar and as he has conversations. He met today with the new president of Syria, who used to have a $10 million bounty on his head from the United States government. So I want to start with a couple of clips from that speech in Riyadh, which, again, I feel like we are just glossing right over, despite the dramatic turning point that it marks in U.S. foreign policy history. So let's roll this first clip.
In the end, the so-called nation builders wrecked far more nations than they built, and the interventionists were intervening in complex societies that they did not even understand themselves. They told you how to do it, but they had no idea how to do it themselves. Peace, prosperity, and progress ultimately came not from a radical rejection of your heritage, but rather from embracing your national traditions and embracing that same heritage that you love so dearly.
Well, recession concerns are making headlines again, and experts, of course, are paying attention. Jim Walker, the economist who predicted the 2008 market crash, recently said he'd be amazed if a recession can be avoided. For those in or nearing retirement, this economic uncertainty is a real concern, very real. When the dollar declines and markets become volatile, traditional retirement strategies can be exposed, unfortunately. That's why more people are exploring gold IRAs. It's a way to include physical gold in your retirement portfolio. Historically, gold has maintained its value during recessions and periods of inflation, offering a potential hedge against economic downturns. This video is proudly sponsored by Augusta Precious Metals, who've put together a free gold IRA guide to help you understand how it works, why it matters, and whether it's the right fit for you and your financial goals. Gold IRAs are specifically for funds that are already held in a qualified retirement account like an IRA or a 401k. Big thanks to Augusta Precious Metals for supporting this video and for making this resource available for free. If gold is piquing your interest, you can download your free guide by clicking the link below. All right, so the key quote there is the so-called nation builders wrecked far more nations than they built. Now, I saw this line being pulled out by Kevin Roberts, who is the president of the Heritage Foundation, which just 10 years ago, many people would have seen as one of the premier think tanks that was cheerleading for the quote unquote nation building. Now, Kevin Roberts himself wasn't there at the time, but as an institution, it's a remarkable change from the Heritage Foundation to not be objecting to a line like this, but in fact to be promoting a line like this, let alone a huge turning point for the President of the United States as a Republican to go in, criticize his own party, his own country in front of foreign leaders. My friend Ryan Grimm pointed out this morning that it almost echoes what Barack Obama did in 2009 in his first term after he was elected, did a swing through the Middle East of his own. At the time, many people on the right derided it as a quote-unquote apology tour. But Trump is not apologizing. He's sort of framing this criticism differently as a chapter that he has helped his own country overcome. It's almost victorious. And you see him speaking to MBS, who drove him around in a golf cart. Elon Musk is there. Sam Altman's there. People from Amazon, all kinds of business leaders. And he's doing something very, very different. So let's roll this next clip. This is also from that major Riyadh speech.
The transformations have been unbelievably remarkable. Before our eyes, a new generation of leaders is transcending the ancient conflicts of tired divisions of the past and forging a future where the Middle East is defined by commerce, not chaos, where it exports technology, not terrorism, and where people of different nations, religions, and creeds are building cities together, not bombing each other out of existence. We don't want that.
Okay, so as I see it, the key line from that speech, and it's one I expect to hear more and more from him, is where he says, the future will include, quote, or he says it this way. He's looking to, quote, a future where the Middle East is defined by commerce, not chaos, where it exports technology, not terrorism. So, taking that in the context of his internal criticism or his criticism of the United States itself, it's sort of interesting that he's uh, dipping his toe into an idea that is the waters of an idea, I should say, dipping his toe into the waters of an idea, that is sort of a foundational myth of the new right. This idea that commerce prevents chaos, or that commerce is the best sort of prophylactic for chaos and war, is kind of what the new right stands against, and the MAGA foreign policy admirers stand against. But what's interesting from Trump's perspective is that he's blending realism with this. And a lot of quote unquote nation building was founded on this idea, or was spread on this idea, that if you have two countries with a McDonald's, they're not going to go to war. So you build up a nation so that it can be the kind of place where McDonald's thrives, because taking that both metaphorically and literally, it means probably that these two nations will not go to war. And in a sense, Trump is making the same argument here, but he's doing it in a realist way as opposed to a neoconservative way. In fact, he's actually calling out the project of nation building. So this is it's to us kind of a new combination, a new cocktail of philosophies coming together, because we're used to seeing that packaged as neoconservatism and nation building. In fact, it almost mirrors the approach that some of these Gulf states take to different things. So I want to just note that according to CNN, we've seen Trump talking about this. We've seen the White House touting this. He has secured a $600 billion commitment from Saudi Arabia to invest in the United States. That does include a defense partnership that the White House is valuing at around $142 billion. So, over the course of this trip, he's hammering out significant investments from Saudi Arabia and also from Qatar. This is again, according to CNN. Again, we have seen the president touting this. He says on Wednesday, Trump announced that they would be agreeing with Qatar to sell. Boeing is selling Qatar Airways 160 jets. So Trump signed that, Qatar signed that, and he says the deal is worth about $200 billion. So that's almost a trillion if you combine it with the Saudi investment. And importantly, then we also combine it with Trump making this massive announcement, surprise announcement. People did not exactly see this coming. It's not entirely unpredictable, but Trump in that major Riyadh speech announced the lifting of sanctions on Syria, and that got massive applause, standing ovation. And interestingly enough, he then met with the new Syrian president, a man who did once again have a $10 million bounty on his head from the U.S. government not long ago. Murtaza Hussein at Dropsite posted made a really good point on X. He says, as an elder millennial, it's really something to see the coda to the war on terror era being the US president shaking hands with the former head of Al Qaeda in Syria and then building a Trump tower in Damascus. So, what Murtaza is alluding to there is these reports that Trump has been offered, or that actually the Syrian leadership has been intentionally floating the idea of a Trump Tower Damascus. So this is reporting from The Independent, who quoted Jonathan Bass, they describe as a quote pro-Trump activist who met with Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara, who you may know as al-Golani previously. You may remember him. We've talked about him here on this program. But he, having met with Shara, told The Independent that Shira is saying they want to have a Trump Tower in Damascus. Quote, he told me he wants a Trump Tower in Damascus. He wants peace with his neighbors. What he told me is good for the region, good for Israel. Well, speaking of which, there was a report in the Times of Israel that Israeli officials have said Netanyahu specifically requested Trump not to lift sanctions on Syria during their last meeting. So this entire trip is, I think, putting the focus on all of the different puzzle pieces moving together. Very, very interesting week for the United States' relationship with Israel. It's sort of too early to tell whether this is a blip or the start of a different chapter. We have way more talk in Israeli corners, especially the right in Israel, about finally ending the extensive financial entanglement and military entanglement between the United States and Israel, because they feel, the left feels, of course, that those entanglements enable Israel to wreak too much havoc militarily, where the right now says these entanglements prevent them from fully doing what they need to do in the region militarily. So it's two different arguments for the same point, that Israel is being hampered by its deep financial entanglements with the United States. But when you see that argument suddenly being made on the Israeli right, that can become a fundamental change, because perhaps we'll look back and say Donald Trump awakened the Israeli right to the problem of America's interests and Israel's interests, the way the American people see their interests, the way the Israeli people see their interests. Are those things always in concert? That's been a much easier case for politicians to make for a really long time. And I think Trump, who's so sensitive to public relations, and it was about a year ago, he commented on the war in Gaza, saying that it was a public relations problem for Prime Minister Netanyahu. So he's sensitive to these types of things, and he may be, in the strangest possible way, like actually finally shaking this loose, this reality loose, that it has drawbacks that may, if you are an Israeli politician, you may determine the costs are no longer worth the benefits. So that's finally a conversation that appears to be emerging. And we'll see how far it goes. I mean, it could all completely change. Trump goes back and forth on these types of things. But what a wild week in geopolitics and honestly in American history. And I said I would get back to the Qatari jet. That has been one of the biggest stories in media this week. And again, it's not that it isn't an important story. It's not that it doesn't reflect corruption. The story is basically that Qatar is donating a jet. This is what's in the works, to the Department of Defense. It's been covered as sort of being donated to Donald Trump. Well, after it goes to the Department of Defense, then it's supposed to go to the Trump Presidential Library. Trump has said this is a good deal because Air Force One is embarrassing. Boeing is way behind in making improvements to Air Force One. And this is a palace in the sky. If you look at pictures of it, it truly is a palace in the sky. And so why shouldn't the United States accept a gift rather than charging taxpayers all this more money? And it's perfectly legal. It doesn't violate the Emoluments Clause because it's being given not to an individual, not to Trump himself, but to the Department of Defense and then to the Trump Presidential Library. Now, I think it's fairly clearly violating the spirit of the Emoluments Clause. It looks like a naked bribe. It looks completely transactional. And the question of appearance is always important to the substance of corruption. Corruption needn't go beyond the appearance of a conflict of interest because at that point you lower the credibility of people on the sides of the deal, whether or not it's sincere. The questions linger to the point where people don't ever actually know what's going on behind closed doors, what ultimately comes of it, and how it changes people's mind or doesn't change people's mind. I think when the White House says it's insane to suggest that Donald Trump is accepting a bribe and that could ever have his approach to foreign policy shifted by bribes. I mean, I think it's an interesting point, right? Because Donald Trump takes so many arrows from his own side from going out on a limb time and again on issues domestically and in foreign politics. And, the guy is fairly immune to that kind of criticism. On the other hand, there is a reason that the Wall Street Journal, as the Wall Street Journal reported extensively, I mean, this story must have taken them so much time to put together. The Trump family, the Trump sort of business network, is doing lots and lots of deals in the Middle East. And that is a very important, I think, backdrop to everything that's going on right now. Because I think, contra the point that Trump can't be bribed, I think actually his point is kind of that these financial entanglements and these financial deals bind people closer together, that the deal making binds people closer together. That's what I mean by it's sort of a mirror image of how the Gulf states see this in the first place, and a total departure from how the United States approaches these things, at least publicly. And again, appearance is an important part of corruption and conflict of interest. So I'm just going to tick through a bullet point list. Trump residential towers constructed in Dubai, Jeddah, Trump owned golf course in Qatar, stablecoin from Trump's financial organization got $2 billion in funding from the UAE and Saudi royals. 3.5 billion to Jared Kushner's PE fund from royals of 3 Gulf states. State-backed funds have raised $6 billion for Elon Musk's XAI. Elon Musk was on the trip. Dubai just recently started looking at Elon Musk's Boring Company to build an 11-mile tunnel network, and the nephew to the king of Saudi Arabia has invested in XAI as well. And again, I don't think Trump is denying that these are entanglements that matter. I think that's kind of his point, that these deals are going to create a more peaceful environment because they create more personal ties. The Saudis brought out a McDonald's trailer for Donald Trump while he was there. Again, I mentioned MBS was driving him around on a golf cart. He obviously loves the pomp and circumstance, whether he's in Buckingham Palace or he's in Riyadh. It's obviously something that he really like. He finds that to be a sign of great respect. Throughout history, that's certainly not an aberration. Many men have seen that to be the same way. It's a little bit. Some of the Western countries are a little bit more demure, but these days at least. But that's what's interesting to me about all of this is that sort of him saying that we're lifting the sanctions on Syria so that Syria can have commercial development, that we're going to clear out Gaza so that Gaza can have commercial development. Both of those things he's saying are for the sake of peace. And he was marveling in Riyadh at the fact that these countries were built up not by the West, although you can definitely nitpick that point, but by these countries on their own. And he's saying this wasn't a product of nation building as he's looking around at Riyadh. And again, what you're seeing here is this philosophy fundamentally that commerce and investment are the best routes to peace. Commerce versus chaos. That is the dichotomy that he set forward here. And so the corruption bothers me. That may seem naive. I'm sure it bothers many of you. I do, though, think it's important to put it in the context of Trump seeing corruption as the means to the end of peace, right? That if I have to take a jet to get peace, it's there are a lot worse ways to get to that end. It's not an argument that I agree with. I do, however, think that in the sort of shiny object jet coverage, there has been some missing of that nuance. It doesn't make it, by the way, any less objectionable, but I think it's part of a much more interesting story about what's going on in the Middle East during Trump's trip, which is that he is fundamentally rejecting decades. Even Obama started that way in 2009, and by the end of his presidency, after the Arab Spring, things had changed significantly, Syria being exhibit A of that. Trump is rejecting a decades-long trajectory in the Middle East. He is trying to turn the chapter, trying to turn the page to a new chapter. I don't know what that would mean for whomever is his successor, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican. Genuinely, no idea what that looks like. But it's not coming from either sort of camp, just pure realism or pure neoconservatism. It's an interesting blend of I don't know if I wanna say both. It's sort of a blend of ideas and arguments from neither camp, pulling on different things that have been fought about for a really long time. Now, I will say, if there is room for optimism, it's that what we've been doing has not been working, and it's hard to imagine something much worse than the status quo of American foreign policy. So maybe here the glass is half full. We'll see. But if anything, there's also significant concern that this is the domestic banana republic doom spiral of lawfare and all of that. Then you start to see it more nakedly in our foreign policy, and there are reasons that these norms for roughly the last 100 years that have underpinned foreign policy in ways that have been very unsuccessful and in ways that in some senses have been successful. There are benefits and disadvantages to all of this, but one of the benefits, at the very least, is that you have people trying to avoid conflicts of interest and ethical lapses. So again, means to an end argument is out there. That's really the one that Trump is making. Not one that I agree with. I also don't agree with the status quo. I think a lot of people in the country feel the same way. But it would be, I think, very helpful if the media and the political class at least tried to put all of this in the proper context. Would be helpful for their own argumentation as well, because it's better not to argue against a flat caricature and to argue against what's really happening. So, what an interesting week. We will continue to follow these developments. I mean, from the Houthis to Hamas, this is a complete 180 from Donald Trump. Not an unpredictable one from Trump himself, not a surprising one from Trump himself, but certainly when you see it actually happening and when you see him coming out and saying these things, it's dramatic. So thank you for tuning in. Undercurrents.tv is where you can go to get a premium subscription of the show. We post our paywalled episodes there. You get a weekly email newsletter from me, and of course, you get a private email address to stay in contact with us. Please subscribe on YouTube, wherever you're downloading your podcasts, and we will be back here with more Undercurrents soon.